The Rivals is a comedy of manners. Sheridan is by far the greatest writer of comedy in the 18th century. He appeared on the literary horizon at a time when the sentimental comedy had gained ground. The writers of sentimental comedy exhibited tears in place of laughter, distressing situations in place of intrigue, and pathetic heroines and serious lovers in place of rogues, gallants, and damsels. These dramatists were great moralists, and their main purpose was to instruct the theatre goers instead of entertaining them. That is why their characters were man as they ought to be, not as they are. With the result, realism was driven out of the comedy. It was against this misnomer of comedy that Goldsmith and Sheridan raised their voice. But Goldsmith was only an elder, not a better soldier than Sheridan. Sheridan criticized the sentimental comedies in almost all his plays. Sheridan successfully avoided the goddess of the woeful countenance in his plays. He rehabilitated wit, fun, laughter, and mild satire in their respectable place in his comedies. He started writing satiric, humorous, and witty plays reflecting the social manners and the spirit of the age. In this respect, he took inspiration from the writers of Comedy of Manners. The Comedy of Manners had its origin in Ben Jonson's Comedy of Humors. Ben Jonson was the follower of the classical ideal of comedy, using laughter as a corrective. For this purpose, he invented the characters who had a dominant humor of their own and were mostly named after it. This comedy represented not the qualities of an age, but of humanity. The Restoration dramatists revived this comedy, representing the qualities of their immediate field. It differed from the earlier species in its laughter, in its lighter handling, unconcerned with morals and realistic portrait of a particular age. It was called the comedy of manners because it did not aim at presenting the human nature but the manners of the particular society. It depicted the manners of the contemporary aristocracy with their elegance, fashion, and vices, pomp and show, polished behavior, all sorts of intrigues, gallantry, cultivation of wit, and brilliant conversation. The scenes of these comedies were generally laid in London. The Rivals is certainly a comedy of manners according to its general definition. It depicted the manners of the contemporary 18th century English society, particularly the life of Bath. The life lived at Bath was a gay life of intrigues, gossips, scandals, and flirtations and frivolity. Their intrigues are the most profound occupations of their lives. May he be a Captain Absolute or Lydia Languis or Mrs. Malaprop. Almost all the characters are entangled in love armors and have nothing more important to do than to pay social visits, learn fashionable dances, devour romances, and fight duels. The ideal country landlords came there to ape the fashions of the town. Bob Eckers is an example of wit. He learns the fashionable French dances, devour romances, and fight devils. The ideal country landlords came there to ape the fashions of the town. But Bob Eckers is an example of wit. He learns the fashionable French dances, although he finds himself utterly unfit. The gay youth flocked in Bath to pursue beautiful bellies and harass to fortune. Captain Absolute is such a case. Lydia Langus represents all girls at Bath who lay idling, reading romances, and dreaming of romantic elopements. For the old ladies also, Bath provides such matrimonial chances and attractions. Mrs. Malaprop is awfully hungry for a marriage before she bids a final goodbye to her sweet passions. In plot construction and method of treatment, it is very much like the artificial comedy of manners. Sheridan manipulates his plot with the stock devices of the comedy of manners. The mistaken identity, the tyrannical parents, as both Lady and Captain Absolute, the overbearing father threatening to disinherit his son if he does not obey him. Sir Anthony versus Captain Absolute, the old widow guardian working as a chaperone, interesting letters of her ward, and herself seeking a lover, as does Mrs. Malaprop, are all stock situations and can be traced in many of the Restoration comedies. Since he was writing on the lines of the comedy of humor of Ben Jonson and the Restoration comedy of manners, he named his characters in that fashion. Most of his characters are named by the humor they represent. Sir Anthony Absolute has the absolute temper. Lydia Languis is the typical languishing beauty, luxuriating in idle dreams. Sir Lucius O'Trigger of his revolver to shoot his adversary, and Mrs. Malapropos glorifies herself in the inappropriate use of words. The characters are mostly comic. Mrs. Malaprop, Bob Eckers, Sir Anthony, and Sir Lucius are comic in everything they do or say. Falkland produces laughter by his caprices and absurd sentimentality. There is incessant laughter enjoyed at the cost of Mrs. Malaprop due to her inappropriate use of words. The true spirit of comedy, fun and frolic, humor and wit, and even boisterous laughter reign supreme in this play. Sheridan's models were the Restoration masters who, in their comedies, were guided by a witty, humorous, and satirical portraiture of their society. Sheridan also writes in the same vein is equally satirical in characterization and witty and brilliant in his dialogues. Almost all the characters in the rivals render themselves to a satiric interpretation, except Captain Absolute and to some extent Julia. Sir Anthony, Sir Lucius, Bob Eckers, Mrs. Malaprop, and Lydia have some quality or the other that has been exaggerated for satiric purposes. But the nature of Sheridan's satire was never malicious, bitter, or pungent. In his satire, there is no sting, it only tickles and works as a corrective. So he provokes free laughter throughout the play. And even when he hits, he does not hurt. Thus, it is gay and amusing, like most of the Restoration comedies, and is mildly satirical though unconcerned with morals as good comedies are.